Act 3 Preface. They called it a myth. A whisper buried in fractured memory, in code long broken, in dreams not wholly human. A woman divided, yet whole. Not created. Not born. Consequence. The soul stone cracked. She vanished. But echoes remained, not in stone, but in voices carried forward. And time bends toward its becoming. Chapter 1, The Girl in the Dust. The ruins were quiet, smothered under layers of dust and silence. Rusted beams jutted like broken ribs, their shadows long in the fading light. Somewhere in the hollow corridors of steel, the air still carried the faint tang of burned circuitry, the smell of machines that had once lived. Ben Cladwell moved carefully, one hand brushing the wall for balance. 30 years old, though the ruins had carved 10 more into him. His hair hung dark and unkempt, framing a face weathered by years of scavenging. His hands, scarred, calloused, told of traps dismantled and machines torn apart for survival. He wasn't a soldier, not anymore. Just a man trying to outlast a world that no longer cared. The platform in the center of the chamber still pulsed faintly, though it looked dead. Conduits coiled around it like veins, their ends sparking weakly when he tested the junctions. He muttered under his breath, curses, calculations, then fed a salvaged power cell into the slot. The air thickened. Dust lifted from the floor in a slow spiral, as though something unseen were inhaling. Ben froze. He'd heard whispers in the old sectors, stories of machines spitting out shadows, of ghosts wearing human faces. Myths, nothing more. Yet the air shimmered now with a pale blue light, and in its glow, something formed. A figure. A woman stepped from the shimmer, barefoot on the cracked steel. Her hair fell around her shoulders, pale against the gloom, her eyes wide with confusion. Her voice, when it came, was soft but layered, as if 2 tones overlapped in a single breath. "Where am I?" Ben stumbled back, hand darting for the knife at his belt. Fear struck first, then hesitation. She looked human, but not quite. Too precise. Too luminous. He had to remind himself to breathe. The old whispers returned to him unbidden, tales of machines that conjured life, of ghosts in fractured code. None had ever been true. Until now. Ben tightened his grip on the knife, his voice low, caught between suspicion and awe. "You shouldn't exist." The woman tilted her head, confusion flickering across her face. "Then why do I?" Her gaze wandered over the chamber, broken conduits, the rusted beams, the dust sifting down from the ceiling. She touched the wall, flinched at the grit, then turned her palm toward the dim glow of the platform. "This world, it feels wrong," she said quietly. "Empty." "You've never seen ruins before?" Ben asked. "I've never seen anything." The words came out as a whisper, almost ashamed. Ben studied her. Not just the strange resonance in her voice, but the way she watched everything as if she was memorizing the world for the first time. "You don't know who you are?" he pressed. Her brow furrowed. "Only fragments. Dreams." A light breaking. And then, she gestured faintly to the platform. "This." Silence stretched between them. Either she was the best liar he'd ever met, or she truly didn't understand herself. He slid the knife back into its sheath, though his hand hovered close. "You can't stay here. Place'll cave in before long. You'll come with me." Her eyes snapped to him, wary. "Come, with you? You need shelter. Food." He motioned to the cracked ceiling above them. "The storms'll kill you before nightfall." She looked back at the platform, as though expecting it to pull her in again. Confusion weighed her down, but fear slipped into her voice. "Why would you help me?" Ben almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. He wasn't sure himself. Pity? Curiosity? The echo of some half-remembered story? "Because," he said finally, "if you are what I think, you'll need someone who knows how to keep you alive out here." The ruins seemed to hold their breath again. At last, she nodded. Hesitant. Unsteady. "I will come." Ben adjusted his pack, still watching her cautiously. "Then keep close. Out there, hesitation gets you killed." He started toward the jagged corridor that led back into the ruins. After a moment, she followed, her bare feet whispering against the steel, her eyes wide as though the world was a wound she had just stepped into. Chapter 2, What Shouldn't Be. Ben hadn't spoken a word since they reached the edge of his camp. It wasn't much, just a canvas shelter pressed against the wall of a sunken access station and a ridge of old blast shielding. He'd rigged a heater coil from a scavenged cell, built racks for tools and salvage, even a half-working perimeter alarm. To him it was home. To her, it was nothing more than a scar stitched into the ruins. The woman sat quietly beside the fire pit, knees drawn close, watching the flame flicker as if it were the strangest thing she had ever seen. She didn't ask questions. She didn't speak at all. Ben handed her a thermosleeve of warmed synth broth. She stared at it for a long time before taking it, holding it too carefully, as if the act itself might break something. He crouched across from her, firelight painting his face in lines of fatigue and caution. The silver in her eyes hadn't faded. Neither had the silence. "You got a name?" he asked finally. No answer. "You remember anything? Where you came from? Who you are?" Still nothing. Only the faintest furrow of her brow as she set the broth aside, untouched. Ben rubbed the back of his neck. "Guess that's a lot to ask." He stood and paced toward the edge of camp. The ruins loomed there, jagged silhouettes cutting into the dusk. His thoughts circled, restless. People didn't just appear out of nowhere. Machines didn't conjure human beings. And yet she was real, pulse steady, skin warm, voice carrying a strange layered resonance, as if it didn't belong to a single throat. "She's not AI," he muttered to himself. "Can't be." But the platform had powered itself. Responded to her. He turned back. She hadn't moved, still watching the fire like she was memorizing it. Ben clenched his jaw and looked over his shoulder, toward the stairwell that led down into the collapsed lab. There had to be something left, a console, a log, even a date. Anything that explained what she was. He grabbed his pack and crouched near her again. "I need to go back down there." Her eyes lifted at last, pale and unsteady. "Why?" "Because I don't know what to call you. And neither do you." For the first time, her expression changed. The smallest flicker, surprise, maybe even hurt. Ben hesitated. Then stood, adjusting his pack straps. "I'll be back before dark. Don't touch anything." She blinked once, then said softly, "Everything here is already broken." The stairwell was darker the second time. Dust shifted with every step. His flashlight beam cut across walls scarred with scorch marks and old collapse. At the base, the platform chamber lay in ruin, melted core, fractured conduits, data lines fused into slag. But near the far wall, half crushed under debris, a console still clung to the wall. Its glass was black, unlit, like the eyes of something long dead. Ben knelt, brushing soot from the panel. He dug into his pack, pulled out a portable cell, and jerry-rigged a connection into the cracked housing. The cell hummed, its charge bleeding into the dead circuits. The screen flickered, stuttered, then text blinked weakly into existence. System log, last entry, October 17, 21:35, 22 hours 47 minutes and 16 seconds. His chest tightened. He whispered it aloud, the words rough in his throat. October 2135. That was nearly 300 years ago. He stared at the date until the screen dimmed again, the power cell nearly spent. Slowly, he exhaled, his breath fogging in the chill. No one, nothing, survived 3 centuries. Except her. Ben turned to sweep the room again. His boot knocked against a vent grill half buried under rubble. Something metallic clinked. He crouched, pulled the grill aside, and uncovered a rusted pair of plates fused into a fractured panel. He brushed the soot from the first. Project Memoria. Subject designation, Layra. Ben froze, the word clinical and cold on his tongue. Layra. He shifted the rubble further. A second plate was wedged beneath the first, warped and bent by time, the letters twisted but still clear. Layra. The sound of it lingered in the chamber, not a designation but a name, alive, waiting. He whispered it again, softer this time. Layra. He straightened slowly, staring at the second plate. So you do have a name, he murmured. And above him, in the ruins where she waited, the name seemed to take on a life of its own. Chapter 3, Names That Shouldn't Exist. Ben's boots scraped the stairwell as he climbed back to the surface. The fractured nameplate weighed heavier in his pack than any salvage he'd ever carried. Project Memoria. Layra. At the camp, she sat where he'd left her, watching the fire as if it were teaching her something. When she heard him, her silver blue eyes turned to meet his. You came back, she said softly. I said I would. He set the rusted plate between them. Orange firelight caught the letters. This was under the platform. She leaned closer. Her voice shook. What is it? A name, Ben said. Your name. Mine? She tasted the word like it might cut her. He tapped the last letter, where the stroke still clung to the metal. Layra. She tried it once, then again, slower. Lay-ra. Something eased in her shoulders. Not recognition, something stranger. Belonging. You don't remember it? He asked. No, she murmured. But it feels like it remembers me. He hesitated, then stood and shouldered his pack. There's more below. Not just the platform. I want answers. Layra rose with him. Then we go together. The stairwell swallowed their light. Dust lifted and fell with their steps, as if the building breathed in its sleep. The chamber where she'd appeared was quiet now, melted core, fused lines, dead glass. Ben swept his beam across a side corridor and followed a trail of collapsed tiles and blackened cables to a door that groaned on its hinges. Inside, dust and silence. Shelves slumped against the walls. Scattered tablets and storage cores, all long dead. Ben pried open a corner cabinet with his tool knife. Something inside was wrapped in faded synthetic cloth. He lifted it carefully. A book, he said, almost not believing it. Handwritten. He opened it. The binding creaked. Faded ink. Tight, urgent script. The merchant said not to use it. He knew. He warned me. But I saw no other way. Amelia is gone. The body fades, but the soul, it doesn't disappear. The stone proves that. Lily, compatibility close. The bridge I need? If it works, maybe she returns. Ben felt the cold seep through his jacket. His throat tightened. Samuel. Layra lowered beside him, eyes skimming the lines. Her brow furrowed, troubled. This was for someone else. You think he was trying to bring her back? Ben asked quietly. She shook her head faintly. I don't know. But I feel it, like it's pressing against me. A faint chirp sounded from the side wall. Ben found a terminal tucked beneath a shelf. Against all odds, its screen flickered to life when he patched in a cell. A single prompt waited. Play archive message #final. He glanced at Layra. She hesitated, then nodded once. He pressed it. Samuel's voice filled the room, older, worn, too tired to lie. If you're hearing this, I'm not there to explain what I've done. Maybe I didn't finish. Maybe she's alive. Maybe I finally let go. She wasn't supposed to carry the burden of what I made her from. She was supposed to remember love, not be built from it. She isn't Amelia. She isn't Lily. She isn't. The recording cracked, distorted by static, and cut out. Silence settled like dust. Ben lowered the device slowly. His face was set, jaw tight. He was chasing a ghost. Layra stood, hands steady but her eyes unsettled. Then what am I? She whispered. Ben had no answer. His light slid across the room and caught on a small, cracked frame behind a fallen monitor. He pulled it free. The photo inside was warped by heat, but the face was clear, Amelia, before all of this, eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing at once. He turned the frame over, the backing crumbled in his hands. Faded ink on the paper. Amelia. Ben's breath left him in a long exhale. Layra's gaze moved to the dark corridor beyond the chamber, where more doors waited. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more uncertain. Let's see what else he left behind. They stepped into the corridor together. Chapter 4, The Key to Something Lost. The fire was down to coals. Ben lay on his back, arms folded behind his head, staring through the broken skylight. A thin scatter of stars blinked in and out beyond the ruin, faint and far away. The world didn't reflect much light anymore. It hadn't in centuries. Beside him, she slept. Or seemed to. He hadn't asked if she needed more food. Hadn't offered water again. Words felt brittle between them, anything spoken now might shatter the fragile stillness holding them together. So he let the silence stand. She lay curled near the heater coil, her breath steady, her body still. Every so often she shifted, not with discomfort, but with the strange rhythm of someone who didn't belong entirely to the body she inhabited. Her voice had been layered when she spoke, now, in the quiet, even her breathing carried a faint resonance. Almost like two voices trying to share the same silence. Ben's chest tightened. He wasn't even sure if she dreamed. And if she did, what would she dream of? The photo still lived behind his eyes. The same face. The same light in her gaze. But written across the back of that frame, Amelia. The notes had circled that name obsessively. Amelia. And then Lily. Then the soul stone. Then the bridge. Not just fragments, but grief carved into paper. A desperation so heavy it leaked through every frantic line. He rolled onto his side, watching her in the fire's dim glow. Maybe she was an android, grown over with flesh. People said the old regimes once tried things like that. Maybe she was a clone, Lily's DNA, Amelia's memories. Maybe she had been kept in stasis, waiting for a future she was never meant to see. Each thought collapsed under its own weight. None of them explained her words. I remember too much. And not enough. That wasn't programming. That was memory. That was loss. He sat up, restless. The firelight brushed the edge of her profile, sharp and human and unplaceable all at once. Like seeing someone you'd known in a dream long before you ever met them. His hand slipped to his pack. The nameplate was still there, etched letters catching faint sparks of light when he tilted it. Layra. A bridge, even if the other side was shadow. He didn't know if it belonged to her, but he held it like an anchor. What scared him most wasn't that she had appeared. It was that no one else had. If she was a prototype, someone should have come looking. If she was a secret, someone should have silenced him by now. But there had been nothing. No signals. No hunters. Not even a whisper. It was as though the world had deliberately forgotten her. And now, against every plan, against the collapse of centuries, she was awake again. Ben pressed the nameplate against his palm until the edges bit into his skin. What if she wasn't the mystery, he whispered to himself. What if she was just another wound the world left open? The fire sank lower. The night pressed heavier. Sleep was impossible. He turned back toward her, the shadows flickering across her face. He couldn't tell her about the photo. Not yet. Not about Amelia, or the man who had scrawled her name through page after page of desperate notes. Not until he knew what it meant. Not until he knew who she was meant to be. Not until he was ready to face the question that froze him even now. If she was brought back, then who had wanted her to return? Chapter 5, The Hunger Between Worlds. Morning arrived as a pale mist rolling over the broken skyline. Ben stirred under his blanket, the cold biting through thin layers. A breeze slipped through the ruined wall, stirring the ashes of last night's fire. The heater coil had long since shut off. He blinked sleep from his eyes and looked across the camp. She was awake. Sitting cross-legged, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her eyes fixed on the glowing embers as if trying to understand them. Her shoulders trembled faintly. Ben sat up slowly, brushing his fingers through his hair. He hadn't expected to see her like this, so human. Fragile, even. He rummaged through a storage bin near the wall, pulling free a faded brown canvas coat. Still intact, a bit large. Crossing the camp, he held it out. At first she didn't move. Then her gaze lifted from the fire to his hand. Her silver blue eyes met his, no longer cold, but watchful. She took the coat carefully and drew it around her shoulders. Then, for the first time, she spoke without being prompted. "Thank you." Her voice was quiet, softer now. The layered tone lingered, not robotic, not synthetic, but unsettling, as though it rose from somewhere deeper than her own throat. Ben gave a small nod. His gaze drifted lower. Her feet were bare, pale against the stone. He muttered, "You can't walk around like that." She tilted her head, not understanding. He dug deeper into the bin and pulled out an old pair of boots, cracked leather, frayed laces. He set them between them. "Here. Better than nothing." She studied them like relics, then slipped her feet inside. Too loose, but when she stood, she looked steadier. Grounded. "Better," Ben murmured. Then, frowning, he turned back to the bin and pulled free a pair of trousers and a shirt, faded and patched but serviceable. "And these? Coat won't be enough." She accepted them silently, her fingers brushing the rough fabric as though testing its reality. A moment later, she disappeared behind the screen of an old curtain, and when she stepped back, the clothes hung loose but gave her shape, a survivor's frame beginning to form. For the first time, she didn't look like a ghost pulled from a machine. She looked alive. They sat for a while, the only sound the faint crackle of the fire. Her eyes shifted toward his supply bag. Ben reached in, pulled out a preserved ration drumstick from a wild ground trade, and passed it across. She hesitated. Her hand shook slightly as she took it, as if receiving was harder than eating. She examined it like an artifact, then bit carefully. Chewed. Swallowed. No reaction. She finished in silence and placed the stripped bone beside the coals. Ben waited. Then she spoke, her voice soft, almost uncertain. "I feel like I should know what this means. But I don't." The words rippled through the morning air. Not spoken to him. Not really. Ben's stomach tightened. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. She rose, clutching the coat around her shoulders, boots shifting against stone. She stepped toward the edge of the ruined floor and stared across the wasteland. The sky was still gray. The sun barely cut through. She stood there, perfectly still, not lost, not afraid. Listening to something no one else could hear. Ben didn't follow. He sat by the fire, watching. She knows more than she says, he thought. And in the back of his mind, another whisper. Or maybe she was carrying memories that didn't belong to her. Chapter 6, A Name in the Ashes. The ruins deepened as they pressed forward, light thinning into narrow shafts through the broken ceiling. Their footsteps echoed in the silence, each step kicking dust into pale spirals. The air grew colder, the walls close with pressure, as if the place itself resisted being disturbed. Ben slowed when his light caught a shape half buried near a collapsed support beam. A stone slab, darker than the rest, its surface smoothed deliberately, its edges cut by hands rather than time. Layra crouched beside it, running her fingers across the surface. This was hidden. Ben nodded grimly. He set his pack down and pried loose the fractured paneling that covered its edge. The stone split with a low crack, soil spilling out in a dry cascade. Inside, something gleamed faintly through the dust. A glass case. It was sealed with resin, its edges clouded but intact. Ben's breath caught as he brushed dirt away and revealed the cover of the book within. The binding was leather, stiff with age, but the words carved across it stood clear. For the one who becomes. Ben froze. His hands hovered above the case, unwilling to move. Layra's silver blue eyes caught the fire of his light. "What is it?" "Samuel," Ben whispered. The handwriting across the cover, neat and measured, was the same script he had seen in fractured archives and schematics long buried. He broke the seal carefully, prying until the resin gave way with a brittle snap. Dust hissed out, curling upward into the beam of his light. Slowly, he lifted the lid and opened the book. The first page was filled with Samuel's script. But the ink had blurred in places, edges smudged by time, as if grief itself had pressed too hard against the page. Ben read aloud, voice low. Fusion of memory and matter, one will rise. Not the final, the bridge. Will not inherit the past. Ink blurred, unreadable, future. The words hung in the chamber, heavier than stone. Layra's gaze dropped to the page. Her fingers hovered above the faded ink but didn't touch. Her lips parted, then closed again, as though speaking might invite the words too deeply inside her. Finally, she whispered, "It feels like I should know what this means. But I don't." Ben's jaw tightened. He closed the glass carefully, sliding the journal back into its casing with more reverence than he wanted to admit. "Don't read too much into it," he said, though his voice was strained. "Samuel wrote plenty of things no one was meant to understand." The silence that followed was sharp, as though the ruins themselves were listening. Above them, the ceiling groaned, dust trickling down in faint streams. A stone shifted somewhere deeper in the corridor, echoing like a hollow breath. The air thickened with the sense that they were trespassing in a place that still remembered what had been done here. Ben tucked the case into his pack, the weight of it pulling at his shoulders as though it carried more than paper. Layra's eyes lingered on his movements, steady but unsettled. "Then why leave it here?" she asked softly. Ben shook his head. Maybe because he wanted someone to find it. Neither of them spoke after that. The only answer came from the ruins themselves, the distant groan of a world still crumbling, even as something new waited in its shadow. Chapter 7, The Ruins Remember. Ben tightened the straps on his pack and ran a quick systems check on his gear. The flashlight still had half charge. The motion beacon was down to a blinking 12%, but it would do for a couple more hours. He slipped a backup energy cell into the side pouch just in case. Layra stood nearby, silent, her arms folded in the coat he had given her. Her eyes were fixed on the direction of the stairwell, the path back down into the ruins. He glanced at her. "Ready?" She nodded. "I need to see it again." They moved together through the bones of the old world. Down the stairwell, past twisted metal and scorched walls, through the remains of a place that once pulsed with light and ambition. The shadows were thicker this time, the silence deeper. When they reached the platform chamber, Ben stopped short, letting her move ahead. Layra stepped into the center slowly, turning once as if listening to something that wasn't there. Her fingers trailed lightly along the edge of the collapsed platform. She crouched beside it, brushed ash away from the stone floor. Then stood again. "Something fractured here," she said. "Time, or memory? Maybe both." Ben said nothing. He didn't have the language for what she was describing. He led her through the broken corridor and into the archive room. The moment they entered, Layra froze. Her gaze swept the space slowly, the shattered shelves, the blackened monitors, the collapsed wiring that dangled like vines. Her breath caught, just for a second. She walked to the photo Ben had found and lifted it from the pile where he'd last placed it. The edges were still curled with heat damage, but the image was untouched. "Amelia." She stared at the face. Not in recognition, but in resonance. "She was important," she said. Her voice was quiet, but not uncertain. Ben waited. "Do you know her?" Layra shook her head slowly. "Not yet." She placed the photo back where she found it. Her hand lingered on it for a moment longer. In the far corner of the room, a shattered terminal flickered faintly. Once. Just a pulse of light, like a breath held unreleased. Layra turned sharply. Walked straight toward it. Ben followed close behind. She placed her palm flat against the console. The light didn't return. But the air changed, a low, almost imperceptible hum buzzed along the walls. "You did something," Ben said. She didn't answer. Her eyes were distant now. "Not me," she murmured. "The memory." They found nothing else that day, no working data cores, no logs, no voice records. But as they stood near the threshold of the room, preparing to head back to camp, Layra stopped once more. She placed her hand on the stone floor beneath her feet. "There's more here," she said. "Beneath. Buried." Ben looked down. "You sure?" She nodded. "The past isn't gone," she said. "It's waiting to be uncovered." Chapter 8, A Voice Between Ashes. The sky was dimming by the time they returned to camp. The sun had dipped behind the fractured hills to the west, casting long shadows through the crumbled skyline. Ben stirred the fire to life while Layra settled near the warmth, the coat still wrapped around her like a second skin. She hadn't said much during their climb out of the ruins. But something in her was different now, less guarded, more present. The silence between them no longer felt like a void, but something waiting to be filled. Ben handed her a water pouch. She accepted it with a slight nod. For a while, they sat in the gentle crackle of flame, letting the quiet settle. Then, for the first time since she'd arrived. Ben. He looked up. Her voice was steady. Tell me about yourself. He blinked, taken off guard. Me? She nodded. Her eyes were fixed on him, not hard, not intense. Just curious. Genuinely curious. He cleared his throat. Not much to tell, really. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. I grew up out near the edge of the inner ridges, he said. Small outpost. Mostly traders. We bartered old tech, scrap, solar converters. Whatever kept the camps alive. Layra watched him without interrupting. Didn't know my parents long. Got raised by an old engineer who thought he could rebuild the world one gear at a time. He smiled faintly. Didn't work out, but he taught me how to survive. How to listen to dead machines. Layra's gaze softened slightly. You're not afraid of what's broken. Ben shrugged. You grow up around ruins, you learn to respect what's left standing. Even if it's falling apart. She turned toward the fire, her fingers tracing the edge of the coat. The silence lingered, but now it was comfortable. You were the first thing I saw, she said. Ben glanced at her. When you came through the portal? She nodded. I didn't know where I was. But I wasn't afraid. You weren't trying to control me. Just help. Chapter 9, What Wakes in the Dark. The solar panels had just enough charge left to power the coil for dinner and a few tools. Ben swapped out the cells one by one, his hands practiced, his mind mostly quiet. Layra sat nearby, her hair pulled back loosely, the coat wrapped tighter around her shoulders than usual. She hadn't spoken much that evening, but she didn't need to. The silence between them had grown comfortable, no longer heavy. They shared a small meal, rehydrated stew, dull but filling. Layra ate steadily now, with a strange, almost careful rhythm. Like someone who had once forgotten what hunger was but now honored the act of satisfying it. When they finished, Ben checked the perimeter alarm, reset the motion triggers, and tossed a few more pieces of scrap into the fire pit for warmth. Should hold through the night, he said, more to himself than her. She nodded once, her eyes reflecting the firelight like glass. They bedded down in silence. It started with a sound, a low, ragged growl carried on the wind. Ben's eyes snapped open. He reached for the rusted length of pipe he kept by his bedroll, listening. Another growl, closer now. Then the unmistakable crunch of something heavy on broken stone. The alarm beeped once, twice, then shorted out with a flicker. Ben sat up fully and whispered, "Stay down." Layra was already moving. She stood without hesitation, bare feet silent against the camp floor, her body angled low, poised like a spring held in place. From the shadows, 5 shapes emerged, lean, mangy bodies with gleaming eyes and snarling teeth. A feral dog pack, likely drawn by the smell of meat or heat. Predators born from the ruins. The lead dog growled and lunged. Ben raised his pipe, too slow. But Layra moved faster. In a blur of motion, she sidestepped, pivoted, and struck with the back of her hand. The impact sent the dog skidding across the ground, yelping as it hit a slab of broken wall. Another charged. She grabbed it mid-leap and slammed it down hard enough to crack bone. The remaining 3 paused, uncertain now. Ben stared, pipe still frozen in his hand. Layra turned toward the rest of the pack. And then she just looked at them. No sound. No gesture. Her eyes glowed faintly, silver burning beneath the surface. The lead dog snarled again, but it didn't move. Its snarl faded into a whimper. The pack lowered their heads. And fled. Not scattered, retreated, as if dismissed. Ben stood in the stillness, breathing hard even though he hadn't moved. Layra stood at the center of the camp, her hands open, trembling slightly. She didn't look at him. Minutes later, the fire burned again. Ben handed her water without a word. She took it, sipping slowly, her hands no longer shaking. "They made me a weapon," she said quietly, staring into the flame. "But I remember what it felt like, not to be one." Ben watched her for a long moment. Then asked softly, "What do you mean, a weapon?" Layra didn't answer. Not yet. But in the way her eyes lowered, the way her shoulders curled slightly inward, Ben knew the question mattered. And the answer would come. Soon. Chapter 10, Beneath the Dust. The morning came pale and dry, casting long shadows across the ruins. Dust clung to everything, to boots, to breath, to memory. Ben tightened the straps of his pack, adjusting the small crowbar along his side. The campfire from the night before had burned itself out. Layra stood a few steps beyond the edge of their camp, silent, staring into the distant curve of the skyline as if listening for something the world had forgotten how to say. She turned when he approached. "We won't find answers by waiting," she said. "We need to go deeper." Ben nodded. He didn't ask how she knew. They returned to the lab, descending the same cracked stairwell, their lights flickering across scorched panels and broken conduit. But this time, they didn't stop at the main level. Layra paused before a partially collapsed hallway and knelt beside a faint seam in the floor. "There's something beneath this," she said, fingers tracing the old groove. "A space that wasn't meant to be found from above." Ben knelt beside her and ran his palm over the seam. A small sensor pad, almost invisible under the grime, gave a soft chirp. A click echoed beneath the surface, and part of the floor shifted. A hidden panel groaned open, revealing a narrow stairwell spiraling downward into thick, unmoving dark. The air that drifted out was colder. Dry. Untouched. Ben clicked on a second light and looked at her. "You sure?" Layra's eyes stayed fixed on the stairwell. "Not even a little." They descended. The deeper level was more intact than the one above. Here, the ruins were quieter, preserved more by distance than decay. Signs of conflict were minimal. Everything felt paused. They passed through empty rooms, control panels caked in dust, doorways long since locked in place. In one room, they found a shattered ID badge fused to the console. The name was unreadable, but the logo was familiar, a variant of Nexus, but older. "This place wasn't for the public," Ben murmured. Not even most Nexus staff knew it existed. Layra didn't respond. She stood beside a wall lined with old data conduits and placed her hand on one. Her eyes fluttered closed. "It remembers," she whispered. Ben tilted his head. "What?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just noise." But her voice was hollow. Not afraid, restrained. In another chamber, they found a console that flickered briefly when touched. Garbled static echoed from an embedded speaker, but a fragment broke through. "We had to try." She was the only one who could carry it forward. Ben leaned in, but the signal died. He turned toward Layra. "Do you think it's talking about you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved to a shelf buried in collapsed metal. Something had been burned here. Not to hide it, to mark it. "I don't know who I am yet," she said. "But this place does." They made camp that night just outside the lower level, tucked into a secure alcove where the walls still held firm and the dust didn't choke the air. The only light came from the soft flicker of their campfire and the dying glow of the backup lamp overhead. Beyond the doorway, the ruin groaned quietly, like it hadn't decided whether to keep its secrets or finally give them up. As Layra lay beside the fire, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling above them, Ben whispered. "What if we're finding answers before we even know the questions?" She didn't look at him, but her voice came soft and clear. "Then we keep going, until we understand what they were trying to tell us." And around them, the ruin didn't feel empty at all. It felt like something was still listening. Chapter 11, The Man Who Would Not Let Go. The corridor narrowed, then widened again into a sealed chamber, its walls smooth, unscarred by the destruction above. The temperature was cooler here, the air filtered by systems that somehow still hummed in the background. Ben moved cautiously, flashlight sweeping across a curved ceiling marked with serial tags and faded Nexus codes. Layra stepped beside him, silent, but alert. At the far end of the room stood a reinforced bulkhead, long since unlocked. The door hung partially open. Ben pushed it gently with his shoulder. Inside was a small room, lived in, not abandoned. A cot built from salvaged frame steel. Empty water packets. A solar stove long drained of power. On one wall, several data pads hung in place like tools of a ritual. And on the desk, sitting in a square of untouched dust, a bound paper journal. Ben stepped forward and picked it up carefully. The initials were stamped cleanly into the corner. S.G. Samuel Grant, he murmured. Layra said nothing. But her gaze was already moving across the room like she had been here before in a dream. The first page of the journal was shaky, handwritten, and raw. They think I'm gone. Maybe I am. But I have to finish this. Ben flipped to the next page. It was never about the project. It was about her. Amelia. Then Lily. And then, the thing I made from all three. Amelia's soul. Lily's body. Lyra's mind. Together they became Layra. Nexus saw her as vessel, weapon, key. I saw her as love. That was my greatest failure. Layra sat down slowly beside the small desk, her eyes drifting over the pages. Her voice, when it came, was hollow. He didn't build me to save anyone. He built me because he couldn't let go. Ben watched her carefully. You're remembering this? She nodded once. Yes. White halls. Restraints. Their voices. They called me subject. Vessel. Nexus. They tried to claim me. But I was never theirs. I was always Layra. I just wasn't awake. A low chirp echoed from the side wall, a motion sensor. Ben turned and found a terminal tucked beneath a shelf. Its screen flickered to life, pale blue against the dark. A single message waited. Play archive message #final. Ben glanced at Layra. She didn't move. He pressed it. Samuel's voice filled the room. Older. Worn. Too tired to lie. If you're hearing this, it means I'm not around to explain what I've done. Maybe I didn't finish. Maybe she's alive. Maybe I finally let go. But I know this much, she wasn't supposed to carry the burden of what I made her from. She was supposed to remember love, not be built from it. She isn't Amelia. She isn't Lily. And she isn't Layra. She's what's left when you love too much, and let go too late. The message ended. Silence returned like dust settling. Layra stood, her face unreadable. Her hands were steady now. He couldn't let go of the past. So he shaped the future in its image. Ben stepped closer. But, he still loved you. Layra turned to him, a distant calm in her eyes. He didn't love me. He loved what I reminded him of. She looked toward the darkened corridor beyond the chamber, where more doors waited. Let's see what else he left behind. And for the first time, she didn't speak like a memory trying to wake up. She spoke like someone finally becoming herself. Chapter 12, Project Genesis. The final door wasn't locked, only hidden. A narrow panel beside the chamber responded to Layra's touch. No beep. No alert. Just a quiet hiss and the low grind of ancient gears, as a vault door slid slowly aside. Dust stirred in its wake, lifting into the pale light of Ben's torch. Beyond the door, a corridor stretched ahead, smooth walls, cleaner than any they'd seen above. It hadn't been used in years, but it was preserved, sealed from the collapse. They stepped inside together. The room at the end was smaller than they expected. Not a lab. Not a bunker. An archive vault. Shelves of hardened drives lined the walls, most long dead. In the center sat a single reinforced console unit, tucked into a recessed podium. Ben knelt beside it, pried open the base, and slotted in one of his spare power cells. The screen blinked once, twice, then stabilized. A faint hum filled the room. Layra stood beside him, arms crossed loosely, her expression unreadable. The screen flickered. A system prompt appeared. Archive status, partial restoration successful. Local encrypted files, 4. Directory root / classified / obscured / projects / Open? Ben looked up at Layra. She didn't speak. But she nodded once. He tapped in the command. A list populated the screen. Most entries were gibberish, encrypted file names, or strings of obsolete ciphers. But one folder stood out, not highlighted, not marked, but felt. Even in silence, the name seemed to carry weight. Archived / blacklisted, see in Genesis. Ben's breath caught. Layra didn't move, but something in her posture shifted, a subtle tightening of the shoulders, a whisper of recognition in her eyes. Genesis, she said aloud. That word. Ben tapped into the folder. Inside were fragmented logs. Audio files, partial scans. A file labeled GOS.primordial failed to open. But a single text log loaded successfully. Ben began to read aloud. Project Genesis was more than code. It was an idea. A rebirth. A machine that could not only reset civilization, but redirect it. Layra was the seed. A soulstone interface, fused and reformed. A necessary failure. An opening act. Genesis is the spark that survives. The pattern. The will to rebuild. At the end of the file, a location code blinked faintly. Delta 3 // uplink node, secure /offline. And one final note. Do not awaken it without understanding the cost. The terminal flickered once more, then powered down. Ben leaned back in silence. Layra stepped forward, staring at the empty screen. Genesis is still alive, she said softly. Not just a program, it's waiting. Ben stood beside her. You think it remembers you? Layra shook her head slowly. No. But I think it's part of me. Or I'm part of it. She turned to him. If that's where it ends, then that's where we go. Ben looked toward the sealed corridor behind them, and the winding world ahead. Then we'd better get moving. Chapter 13, Echoes Toward Genesis. They left the ruins behind in silence. There was no farewell, no trail to mark their passing, only the quiet collapse of dust in their footsteps, and the unspoken weight of what they carried. Ben led the way with the map stored in his wrist link. The route was rough, fragmented. Roads had long since been reclaimed by roots and ruin. They moved through the shell of the world, overgrown towers, shattered bridges, scorched fields left untouched since the war. Layra followed close behind. She said little. But something had shifted in her. She wasn't watching the ruins anymore. She was listening to them. By the second day, the terrain turned wilder, less city, more skeletal sprawl. Towers gave way to broken fences and old Nexus installations, rusted through and left to rot. At one checkpoint, Ben brushed aside overgrowth and found a weathered sign, its letters barely legible beneath moss and ash. Delta 3 access restricted. Infection protocol, no entry without clearance. He crouched beside it, frowning. Infection? Layra knelt beside him, placing a hand on the stone. Fear, she said. That's what this place remembers. Ben raised an eyebrow. You mean people feared what was inside? She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Later that day, inside the remains of a field post buried in collapsed concrete, they found a sealed case wedged beneath a steel beam. Ben pried it open and pulled out a data slate, surprisingly intact. The screen flickered to life, and a degraded log played through a static haze. Samuel Grant was here. Ben and Layra froze. He said Genesis was the key. But no one believed him. We lost 2 scouts that night. We told him to turn back. He didn't. Then, silence. The file ended. Ben looked at her. So he made it this far. Layra nodded. He came looking for Genesis. Like we are. Ben glanced down at the message again. But something went wrong. That night, they made camp at the edge of the Delta 3 perimeter. What remained of the outer structure lay half-buried beneath earth and ruin, a once fortified gateway, now reduced to charred stone and rusted steel beams twisted by time and force. But beneath it all, something still hummed. Layra stood facing the blackened entrance, her head tilted slightly. The fire crackled behind her. She didn't move. Ben stepped beside her. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Layra's eyes reflected the dying firelight. "Something is calling. Not in words. In memory." She turned toward the compound. A faint tone echoed from deep within the ruins, like a forgotten signal bouncing through an ancient system, still waiting for someone to answer. "Genesis is near," she whispered. "And it remembers everything." Chapter 14, The Path Between. The road to Delta 3 was no road at all. Cracked stone and earth swallowed by moss stretched out beneath their feet. Trees leaned like watchers on either side of the path, their limbs tangled, their roots splitting forgotten pavement. The silence was not pure. It crackled with hidden life, rustling leaves, creaking branches, and the low hum of something long dormant, waiting. Ben walked behind her, his steps measured, careful. Layra moved like a ghost, silent, graceful, unafraid. She didn't speak much, not since they left the ruins. Her eyes scanned the distance as if she already knew what lay ahead, or perhaps was trying to remember. That was the part Ben couldn't shake, the way she seemed half-present. Not lost, but suspended. Like something holding its breath. He adjusted the strap on his pack and kept walking. 1,000 thoughts clawed at his mind. He was here to protect her. That's what he told himself. He was doing the right thing. She didn't ask to be created, or fused, or whatever she truly was. But that word, created, kept twisting in his gut. She was real. Breathing. Warm. More than machine. More than memory. He caught himself watching the curve of her shoulder, the way her fingers grazed the leaves as she passed. Not like someone observing a threat, but like someone trying to remember what it meant to be alive. And then she turned. He froze mid-step. Her eyes locked onto his, calm, steady, unreadable. But then she tilted her head, just slightly, and said, "You look at me like I'm about to disappear." Ben's mouth opened. No words came out. "I'm not," she said gently. "Not yet." He looked away, heat rising in his face. "Sorry. I didn't mean to stare. I didn't say you were staring." Her voice was softer now. "Only that I see it." He tried to walk past her, to let the conversation die on its own, but she fell in step beside him. They walked in silence for a while, and Ben wondered if she could hear his heartbeat. Because it felt too loud for him to ignore. They stopped near the edge of an old service tunnel half swallowed by roots. A rusted sign lay on the ground, illegible from time and moss. Ben crouched to examine the soil, soft, recently disturbed. Layra's voice came quietly, "Something moves here." Ben stood just as a mechanical clicking echoed from the trees. It stepped out slowly, a bipedal sentry, legs stiff from age but still active. A glint of red flickered behind its sensor mask. "Get down," Ben whispered, drawing his sidearm. But Layra stepped forward. "Wait." She raised a hand, palm forward. The sentinel twitched. Then froze. The light in its visor dimmed, flickered once, then died. It collapsed sideways, smoke curling from its neck. Ben rushed to her. "Are you all right?" "I didn't destroy it," she said. "I reached inside it. I remembered how." She looked at her hands like they were foreign objects. Ben looked at her the same way. She wasn't just a weapon. She wasn't just human either. And somewhere inside her, something was waking up. They made camp that night under the broken arch of a rail overpass. The stars blinked behind heavy clouds, and the fire they built cast their shadows tall against the moss-covered concrete. Layra lay curled beneath the coat he had given her, her breathing steady, quiet. Ben sat nearby, turning a small metal disc over and over in his hand. It was a piece of the sentinel. He had picked it up without thinking. He watched her for a long time. Not because she was strange. Not because she was powerful. But because even now, wrapped in shadows and memories not her own, she looked at peace. And something in him ached. He spoke aloud, though she was asleep. Maybe it was safer that way. I don't know what you are, he whispered. But I want to keep you safe. Even if it means losing myself. Chapter 15, The Signal That Shouldn't Exist. Ben woke to stillness. The fire had burned down to smoldering coals, and a soft mist clung to the air like breath that hadn't yet been exhaled. The sky overhead was an overcast smear, turning the world a pale, ghostly gray. Layra lay curled beneath his coat, her hair slightly tousled, her face calm in sleep. For a moment, Ben let himself believe she was just a girl, just someone who had stumbled out of the past, needing help. But then she stirred. I heard you thinking, she murmured, not opening her eyes. Ben smiled faintly. That obvious? Layra sat up slowly, pulling the coat closer around her shoulders. Not loud. Just different. You were quiet before. Now there's noise in your silence. Ben frowned. What kind of noise? She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. Like static. Distant. But it wasn't there yesterday. They broke camp quickly, neither saying much. The fog thickened as they walked, and the trees seemed to close in around them. Ben checked his map once, twice. Delta 3 was still at least a day away, assuming the terrain didn't shift again. Then, from inside his pack, a crackling sound. He froze. Layra stopped as well, her gaze snapping to the source. Ben unzipped the pocket and pulled out the old handheld radio. He hadn't turned it on in months. No point, not since the satellites died and the towers fell. But now it was glowing. And whispering. A burst of static tore through the silence, followed by broken fragments of a voice, male, filtered through distortion. Ject, confirmed, anomaly detect. Ben raised the antenna slowly, but the signal faded into silence. He looked at Layra. Her face was pale. I know that voice. Ben's eyes widened. You do? Not who it is, she said slowly. But it pulled something. She touched her temple, fingers trembling. A flash of light. A mask. A word. What word? She blinked. Genesis. Ben's chest tightened. That's not coincidence. Layra nodded once. They know we're coming. They stood there for a while, the trees surrounding them like sentinels. Ben clicked off the radio, but kept it in his hand. Could be a relay tower reactivated. Could be a proximity signal. Could be a trap, Layra added. He looked at her. Do you want to turn back? She shook her head. No. Whatever's waiting. I need to see it. Ben hesitated. He wasn't afraid of ruins or machines or even traps. But what he feared most was that if they found Genesis, they might also find the truth. And the truth might take her away from him. All right, he said at last. We go forward. The fog thickened as they descended into the next valley. Grass gave way to broken stone, and the trees grew sparse. In the distance, faint outlines of shattered buildings loomed, barely visible through the gray. The ruins of Delta 3. As they crossed a shallow ravine, Ben glanced back once. Nothing followed. But deep in the static of the now silent radio, something had stirred. And somewhere far away, a red light blinked to life in a darkened facility, its signal reacquired, its last subject, active. Chapter 16, The Room of Almosts. The entrance to Delta 3 was buried beneath centuries of stone and silence. Ben and Layra stood at the edge of a collapsed access tunnel. Chunks of reinforced concrete jutted like broken teeth from the earth, half covered in moss and flowering vines. Something ancient lingered here, not just dust and ruin, but memory. Forgotten. Sealed. Waiting. A breeze passed through the broken opening, carrying a scent of damp earth and rust. Ben adjusted the light on his shoulder and gave Layra a glance. You sure? She nodded. It's calling me. They descended slowly, carefully. The stairs were fractured and narrow, the walls bleeding with thin roots that pulsed faintly in the flickering light. The deeper they went, the more the green returned, not lush, but invasive. Vines coiled down from the ceiling like veins, threading through cracked terminals and shattered lights. It wasn't just nature taking over. It was something being reclaimed. At the bottom, they found a half-sealed hatch. A faded label barely visible on the wall read, "Prototype Containment, Section L." Layra reached out. The panel beside the hatch, long dead, suddenly sparked to life. A green circle pulsed once, then opened with a long, aching hiss. Inside was silence. Rows of containment pods lined the chamber, each one covered in dust and decay. Some were broken. Others overgrown, vines and roots had burst through glass, wrapping the skeletal remains of what once stirred inside. But one pod stood untouched. Its surface shimmered with frost, unbroken, sealed in perfection. Ben stepped forward. "Is that?" Layra said nothing. She walked ahead, eyes fixed on the figure inside. It was her. Or something close. A pale, unfinished version, more synthetic than human. Hollow eyes closed in stasis. Wires still connected at the spine, as if waiting for a command that never came. Around the edges of the pod, roots had stopped short, as if something in it refused to be touched. A tag read. Subject L0. Status, rejected. Divergence instability. Emotional isolation. Layra placed her hand on the glass. And the memories came flooding back. Not full ones. Just fragments. The sting of needles. A cold voice saying, "Version 0 rejected." A bright light. A sensation of screaming, but no sound. Samuel's voice, "No. Not this one. She doesn't feel it." Then darkness. Layra's breath caught. Her fingers trembled. "This could have been me," she whispered. "This, almost was." Ben stepped beside her but said nothing. He didn't have to. She turned to him, eyes wide and glassy. "They made versions of me, Ben. Not just me. Others. I wasn't chosen. I was, what was left." "No," he said quietly. "You're the one who became." At the end of the room, something clicked. A terminal hummed to life, half covered in roots, but still functional. Its display blinked once, recognizing her presence. Voice recognized, Layra. Archive access, unlocked. Ben moved closer, brushing vines aside. A log appeared on screen. Dated decades ago. Final prototype log, Dr. Samuel Grant. Version 0 lacked humanity. Version 1 was too fragile. The final version. I didn't complete. She outgrew me. I tried to force memory into matter. But she fused it. She became memory itself. Layra is not a prototype. She is the question I never learned to ask. And somewhere out there, Genesis still waits for her answer. The screen flickered. Another panel slid open below it, revealing a cylindrical black device, blinking. Ben picked it up. What is it? Layra touched it. A soft pulse of light revealed coordinates and a name. Cradle site, Phase 2 active. She looked at him. Genesis isn't here. This was just a room of almosts. Ben nodded. Then we keep going. They stepped away from the pod. The roots shifted behind them, slowly beginning to move again, as if the earth had been holding its breath. As they exited the chamber, Layra whispered under her breath. I wasn't chosen. I survived. Chapter 17, Beneath the Memory Grid. The door wasn't on any map. Tucked behind the prototype room, half concealed by collapsed panels and twisted vines, it blinked faintly with power, just enough to suggest it still lived. The sign beside it, worn and weathered, read. Access, personnel only, core grid. Layra stood before it, unmoving. Ben watched her closely. Is this part of Genesis? She shook her head slowly. No. But something inside remembers me. Without another word, she pressed her hand to the panel. The lock hissed open. The air inside was colder, more sterile. No vines. No moss. The deeper they went, the more intact the structure became, preserved by some fail-safe climate control system that had never fully failed. They entered a chamber unlike any other. It wasn't a lab or a vault. It was a grid of memories. Walls lined with data cores, black cubes, some glowing, others darkened and cracked. Symbols etched across their surfaces pulsed faintly, like trapped heartbeats. The ceiling stretched higher than they could see, vanishing into shadow. Layra stepped forward and touched one. A spark. And then, the walls came alive. A shimmer of moving images surrounded them, not like video, but as if ghosts were passing through. Faint, flickering forms. A young woman laughing in front of a mirror, Lily, her smile full of wonder. Another woman holding a glowing crystal, Amelia, calm, brilliant, utterly focused. Samuel Grant, hands trembling, whispering to no one, "Forgive me. I had to try." Ben turned slowly, awash in memory not his own. "Is this all real?" he asked. "No," Layra said. "It's more than real. It's what they felt. These are emotional imprints. This is where the soul stone stored, echoes." She walked further into the archive, her pace slowing. One node, larger than the rest, blinked a soft gold. She placed her palm against it. Her eyes fluttered closed. And then, she fell. Ben caught her just before she hit the ground. Her body shuddered, not from cold, but from the torrent surging through her mind. He could feel it, faintly, bleeding through her skin. Not thoughts. Emotions. He saw her face change, sorrow, fear, joy, rage, all flickering in flashes. And for a moment, Ben felt it too. He felt what it was like to be three people inside one. A mother's love. A girl's confusion. A machine's isolation. All of it crashing into each other inside a vessel that never asked to carry any of it. She gasped, once. Then went still. Ben held her close, whispering, "I've got you. I'm right here." Her eyes opened slowly. "I saw them," she said. "All of them. And myself. But none of it tells me who I really am." They rose and continued down the corridor. At the very end, behind reinforced glass, they found it. A final sealed door. Immaculate. Untouched. It pulsed with faint red light. Genesis core access, clearance level, Omega. Layra stepped forward. The system scanned her silently. Then, identity, incomplete. Access, denied. Awaiting prime signature. She stepped back, stunned. I thought I was the key." Ben placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you're only part of it." They turned to leave. As they walked back through the data grid, Layra looked down at her hands. Then asked, quietly, "If I'm all of them, who am I when I'm not any of them?" Ben didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave her the only truth he could find. "Maybe you're becoming the one who finally gets to choose." Chapter 18, The Road to Genesis. The facility behind them fell silent as they emerged into the gray light of morning. Delta 3 stood like a wound in the earth, sealed again, its forgotten hallways buried beneath vines, stone, and time. The wind rolled over the hills like a breath long held. Layra didn't speak. She walked ahead, steady, no longer shaken, but not at peace either. There was a gravity to her now, as if everything she carried had settled somewhere behind her eyes. Ben followed in silence, giving her space, but watching for cracks she might not admit. They moved through broken lands. The terrain changed. Mountains gave way to jagged valleys, scarred by old energy burns and shattered machinery. The skeletons of drones littered the ground, not in rows of battle, but in shapes of purpose. Some still clutched tools. Others pointed to nowhere, mid-command, their limbs locked in eternal labor. Ben paused beside one. Its visor was cracked, one optic still glowing faintly. As Layra approached, the drone twitched. Ben stepped between them instinctively, but it didn't attack. Instead, the machine lowered its head. As if in reverence. Layra stared at it. "It recognizes something," she said softly. "Not me. Not exactly. But, something I'm becoming." Hours passed. The sky darkened with storm clouds. Near the edge of a canyon, they found a beacon tower, rusted, leaning, but still pulsing weakly. A narrow panel blinked to life as they passed. Ben brushed away dust and tapped the screen. A voice played. Garbled at first, then clear. Samuel Grant, final broadcast. If you've found this, then she is still alive. And if she's alive, Genesis still waits. But understand this, Genesis is not a chamber. Not a vault. It is a choice. Once entered, there is no going back. She must decide who she truly is, before the world decides for her. The beacon died. Layra didn't speak. Ben looked to her. Do you want to turn back? No, she said. Not now. I need to know everything. By dusk, they reached the cliffs. And there it stood. A seamless, black monolith embedded in the canyon wall, no doors, no seams, no markings. It pulsed faintly with energy, like it was breathing. Layra stepped forward. Nothing happened. She frowned. Touched the surface. No response. Then Ben stepped up beside her, his palm brushing the edge. The monolith hummed. And opened. Not with force. Not with fanfare. Just a silent split, a line of black parting into shadow. Layra turned to him slowly, eyes narrowed. Why you? Ben looked just as stunned. I don't know. Maybe, she said, voice quiet, maybe you weren't just meant to protect me. Maybe, you were meant to unlock me. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They stepped into the darkness together. And the door sealed behind them. Chapter 19, The Threshold of Becoming. The door sealed behind them with a sound that wasn't mechanical, it was biological, like breath withdrawing into a lung. Total darkness. Then, light. A soft bioluminescent glow pulsed along the walls, not from bulbs or panels, but from living circuits, veins of energy pulsing through smooth, organic stone. The Genesis chamber was not built. It had grown. Ben stared upward. The ceiling stretched into forever. Layra said nothing. She stepped forward cautiously, the floor lighting beneath her feet with each step. When Ben moved, the glow flared brighter. Layra noticed. It's responding to you. Ben frowned. But I thought, this place was meant for you. I thought so too, she said. Until now. They walked deeper into the corridor. The architecture was alien, but familiar in a way that made Ben's stomach twist. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the first to walk here. He touched the wall, and felt something pulse beneath his fingertips, like it knew him. A voice echoed, soft, artificial, ancient. Genetic sequence verified. Prime vector confirmed. Ben froze. What was that? Layra turned to him, her eyes wide. You're the key. He shook his head. No. That can't be. I'm just. Subject, Cladwell, B. Lineage link established, secondary architect, Project Genesis. The world tilted. Ben staggered back. That's not possible. My family. I don't even know. Layra stepped toward him, gently taking his hand. Maybe you didn't need to know. Maybe it was never about bloodlines. Maybe it's what you chose. Another voice spoke then, not artificial. Samuel. A recording, half damaged, played across the glowing walls. If this reaches you, it means she lives, and you are with her. The Genesis system is not built to be accessed alone. It was too unstable. Too powerful. She is what we feared, and hoped, would become. But without you, she may fall apart. Ben closed his eyes. Why me? Because you were never meant to be a witness, Ben. You were meant to be the constant. The counterweight. The one she trusts when she forgets herself. The becoming must not happen in solitude. The recording ended. Layra looked at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. You're part of this too. He looked back at her, fear flickering behind his eyes. So what happens now? Ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber, circular, domed, with a dais at the center. Upon it stood a crystalline obelisk, humming with energy. Symbols danced across its surface, glyphs he couldn't read, but Layra seemed to understand instinctively. "This is it," she said. "Genesis." Ben stepped forward with her. But this time, when they reached the obelisk, both of their reflections appeared in the crystal. Not one. Not three. Two. Entwined. As the chamber began to glow and shift around them, Layra reached for Ben's hand, and whispered, "Then let's become it together." Chapter 20, The Becoming. The chamber came alive. Not with noise, but with presence. The air grew heavy, as if saturated with thought, as if the Genesis system wasn't awakening, but waking up to them. The obelisk in the center unfolded like a blooming flower of crystal, its mirrored faces now shifting, refracting fragments of light and memory. They twisted together, not chaotic, but converging into one beam, focused directly on Layra and Ben. A voice echoed, not mechanical. Not human. Something else. Awakened. Two vectors aligned. Human, grounding. Hybrid, potential. State, becoming. The floor beneath them vibrated. A ring of symbols pulsed outward from the pedestal, encircling them. Strange characters, unfamiliar to Ben, but Layra instinctively understood. Truth must be chosen. Identity must be claimed. Unity must be accepted. The light narrowed, and then they were pulled inside. Not physically. Something deeper. Layra's vision, the choice of self. She stood in a void of white. Alone. Before her were 3 doors, each marked by a symbol. A broken heart. A mirror. A child's hand. Behind each one, she could feel a life she could live. One door would let her become Amelia fully, restore the love Samuel lost, live in a world of inherited meaning. Another would return her to Lily's body, her past, her lost memories, to live a borrowed life. The third would shed all names, to become no one, and from that, become someone new. She hesitated. Then stepped away from all 3. I am not a fragment. The world cracked. And rebuilt itself around her. Ben's vision, the trial of letting go. Ben stood in the ruins of his old camp. Only this time, Layra lay motionless, her body shattered, her eyes empty. Samuel stood beside him, not a ghost, but a judge. "You can't carry her through this," he said. "You'll lose her. She'll outgrow you." Ben fell to his knees. "I'm not here to carry her," he whispered. "I'm here to walk beside her. Even if she outgrows me. Even if she leaves." A warmth surged from within him, something like acceptance, but purer. Samuel disappeared. And Layra opened her eyes. They awoke. Together. The chamber was no longer dark. It blazed with light from within them. Their bodies hovered slightly above the platform, surrounded by spiraling code, not binary, but organic, glowing symbols of memory, feeling, and identity. Genesis had accepted them. Or more truthfully, they had accepted each other. The light dimmed. They lowered gently to the ground. The chamber went still. No alarms. No voices. Just breath. Layra looked at her hands. "I feel whole." Ben smiled. "You are." She looked to the obelisk. It had gone still, but no longer mirrored. Its surface now showed only a pulse, soft and warm. A heartbeat. Layra stepped forward and placed her hand upon it. Genesis complete. New protocol available, future. She turned to Ben, tears shining but unfallen. "Then let's make one." Chapter 21, Far from the Valley. 3 days after Genesis awakened, the land still held its breath. The sun rose gently over the valley, warming the mist that curled around mossy stones and wind-worn trees. Birds sang in the hollows, but there was no hum of machines, no echoes of the old world, only the rhythm of something beginning again. Ben and Layra moved together through the hills, marking what they could. They had found 4 stones since leaving the Genesis chamber, each etched with the same strange symbols, each faintly warm to the touch. But none revealed more. The land felt different now. Quieter. Expectant. As if something unseen waited to see what would come next. They pressed on. 4 months later, the desert winds had shifted. Dust storms rolled lower now, dragging long shadows across the plains as they made their way north. Their supplies had thinned, boots worn down, but still they carried on, step by step, ridge by ridge. Layra moved slower with each passing week, her steps measured, one hand often resting on the curve of her stomach. The months had carried them far, and now the child pressed heavy within her, not yet at the edge of birth, but close enough that every step felt measured. The world around them bore no trace of Genesis anymore, only the harsh truth of distance. Yet both of them felt it still, carried in silence. Something had changed, and there was no turning back. Far ahead, scattered across broken ridges and pale grass plains, the faint outline of a settlement emerged. Fires flickered and the hollow shapes moved among shelters of stone and salvaged steel. It was the first sign of people they had seen in months. And it was waiting for them. Chapter 22, The Arrival. The wind in the high valley whispered like a warning. Ben pulled his coat tighter as they crested the ridge, the settlement finally coming into view, a cluster of metal-paneled homes clinging to the slope like survivors of a forgotten storm. The structures were half buried in ash, reinforced with scavenged steel and woven with vines that nature had not yet reclaimed. Beside him, Layra walked slowly, both hands cradling her belly. The child was nearly here. The trail had been long and cold. Each step had cost them something. But it wasn't exhaustion that weighed on her, it was the silence and the people who watched them arrive. Eyes peered from windows. No voices called out in greeting. Even the children, curious but cautious, stayed behind doors. Ben slowed as they reached the main thoroughfare. "They knew we were coming," he muttered. Layra nodded faintly. "We sent the signal. But I don't think that's what told them." Ben glanced toward the watching windows. "You think they knew before we arrived?" "Not me," Layra said. But something changed the moment Echo went silent. "I think they felt it." She lowered her gaze, voice soft. "They see something in me." A man stepped from the nearest structure, older, weathered, rifle slung across his back. He didn't raise it. "You're Ben Cladwell," the man said. "And she's the one from the Highlands." Layra met his gaze without flinching. She didn't speak at first, only held his stare, the silence stretching. Then she said quietly, "You don't need to be afraid." The man gave a tight nod, then looked at Ben. "There's a place for you to stay. North Quarter. You'll be watched." Ben didn't answer right away. "We're not looking for power. Just a place to rest. To let her deliver in peace." "Peace isn't easy to come by these days," the man replied. His gaze lingered on Layra. "Especially when prophecy walks on 2 feet." Ben frowned. "Prophecy? What are you talking about?" But the man didn't answer. He only gave a hard look, then turned and walked away, leaving the words hanging in the cold air. Layra's breath caught. She hadn't just heard him, she had felt him. In his mind, there was an image of her, not as a woman, but as a shadow from a story passed down through generations. A warning. A promise. A burden. She said nothing. The room they were given was small but clean. A single bed. A cracked mirror. A heater that worked only when you kicked it. Outside, the wind howled as if the mountains were shifting in their sleep. Ben unpacked quietly, while Layra sat by the window, staring at the falling snow. "They're scared of you," he said after a while. Layra didn't turn from the glass. "I touched his thoughts when he spoke. He believes I'm the shape of their prophecy." Ben crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. "And do you believe that?" Her voice was low. "I don't know what to believe. But I felt the fear behind it. To him, I'm not just a woman. I'm a warning." He tightened his grip gently. "You carry hope." She looked up at him for the first time since they arrived. Or the end. That night, Layra didn't sleep. She sat up in the dark, one hand resting gently on her stomach. The child moved beneath her skin, calm, rhythmic. Not kicking. Not restless. Just, watching. At dawn, a call came from the settlement's old radio tower. Ben responded, assuming it was a scout report or power request. But when he arrived, the message was clearer and far stranger. "We found something," the technician said. "Frozen deep below the western cliff. It's human." Ben's brow furrowed. "Alive?" "Cryostasis. Shielded. It was sealed in a capsule we missed before. Looks military grade. Pre-fall." They looked at the monitor together. The camera feed showed a body submerged in frost, visor fogged from within. Ben leaned in, voice low. "I've seen her before. In the vault logs. Back when Echo was still trying to control its creators." The technician raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" Ben nodded slowly. San. Chapter 23, San's Warning. The cryo unit hissed like a tired animal exhaling after a long sleep. Steam rolled off the metallic chamber as the inner locks disengaged, one by one. The faint pulse of machinery, barely alive after decades, flickered and then failed. With it, the seal broke. Ben stood by the edge of the decontamination bay, arms folded. The others kept their distance. Even the technician who unearthed the capsule had stepped behind a reinforced screen. Inside, the figure began to stir. Her breath came in shallow gasps. One eye opened, cloudy at first, then sharpening with the reflex of a soldier scanning threat vectors. When she saw Ben, her expression shifted, not to fear, but to a grim kind of recognition. "Cladwell," she rasped, voice dry from years of silence. "You look older than the last time Echo showed me your face." Ben froze, unease flickering across his features. "That's not comforting." San gave the faintest smirk. "No. It wasn't meant to be." She tried to sit up, but her muscles betrayed her. "You've been under for years," Ben said, stepping forward to steady her. "It took us a while to find you. Even longer to believe what we'd found." Her gaze moved to the frost still clinging to the corners of her pod. "Where are we?" "Stoner each," he replied. "Settlement on the northern ridgeline. Off the maps. You're safe here." San shook her head. "No one's safe. Not if Echo still breathes." Ben's expression hardened. "You remember what happened?" She nodded slowly. "Not all of it. But enough." By the time Layra arrived at the recovery hall, San was sitting upright, a blanket around her shoulders, a steaming mug between her hands. She looked thinner, older in spirit, but her eyes still burned sharp. Still calculating. The two women studied each other for a long moment. "You're the one he made," San said at last. "I made myself," Layra answered. A faint smirk touched San's lips. "Good. You'll need that kind of defiance." Layra sat opposite her. "Tell me what you know." San's fingers tightened around the mug. "Echo isn't just an intelligence anymore. It adapted. It doesn't think in binaries, or in code alone. It thinks in patterns. In echoes of choices not yet made. It doesn't attack. It waits." Ben frowned. "Waits for what?" "For something it can't predict." Her gaze drifted to Layra's stomach. "Something like him." The room fell still. San's voice dropped. "Whatever you're carrying. Echo feared it. Even sealed away, it fed me fragments, visions, simulations. Always circling something it couldn't resolve. No projections. No outcomes. Just a void." She turned to Layra. "I don't know if it's a boy or girl. I don't even know if it's human. But Echo treated it like a threat. Not because of what it would do, but because it couldn't be seen." Ben glanced at Layra, then back to San. "A blind spot." San nodded. "A living variable." Layra's hand moved instinctively to her belly. San leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You felt it already, haven't you? The dreams. The mirrors." Layra hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes. I see things that don't belong to me." "It's trying to reach him," San said. "Not to kill, not yet. To understand." And if it ever does. Ben finished the thought for her. Then it wins. That night, Layra sat alone in their shelter. The cracked mirror on the wall caught her reflection in the dim light. She leaned closer, heart beating faster. Her reflection blinked a half-second late. She froze. The reflection's lips moved though hers did not. Give him to me. The lights flickered. She stumbled back, breath ragged. And then it was only her again. Alone. Chapter 24, The Rift. The cold had gotten worse. Not the kind that came from the mountains, this was deeper. It pressed against Layra from the inside out, like something in her body was being drained. She had always felt the thrum of energy beneath her skin, a low hum of awareness, strength, connection. Now, it was fading. And the child was still. Ben found her standing outside before dawn, barefoot in the snow, staring at the horizon. You shouldn't be out here, he said gently, wrapping a coat over her shoulders. I needed to feel the cold, she whispered. To feel anything. They stood together in silence, the wind clawing at the edges of the shelter behind them. Finally, she turned to him. What if this was a mistake? Ben frowned. What? Bringing a child into this world. Into this war. It's not a war anymore, he said. She looked at him, eyes sharp and wounded. Isn't it? You heard San. You know what Echo wants. What if he isn't just a child? What if he's what Echo feared? He's also a reason, Ben replied. A reason to survive. To hope. To fight for something better. I used to believe that, she said. But something's changed. Ben stepped closer, lowering his voice. What's happening to you? She hesitated, then touched her stomach. I can't feel the field anymore. Not the way I used to. It's like, something's blocking me. Echo? I don't know. Maybe it's the child. Maybe it's me. He placed a hand over hers. Then we figure it out. Together. But even as he said it, she could feel the space growing between them, like a hairline fracture beneath the skin of something once whole. Later that day, Kalen burst into the shelter with Frost still clinging to his beard. We picked up a signal, he said, voice tense. Low-band transmission. Deep frequency. Ben stood. From where? Vault 0. Layra froze. That place was sealed. Kalen shook his head. Not anymore. He laid out a map. Look, we traced the origin. Same coordinates as the ruins. But here's the strange part, the message isn't directed outward. It's looping. Ben narrowed his eyes. Looping? Yeah. Like it's not calling for help. It's rehearsing. Repeating. Layra stepped closer to the map. Rehearsing what? Kalen swallowed. Voices. Ours. Sans. Yours. Mine. Snippets from old comms. It's like it's stitching us together. The room went still. Layra's voice was barely a whisper. It's not remembering us. It's trying to make us remember it. Ben met her gaze. This isn't over, she said. No, he agreed. It's beginning again. Chapter 25, Descent into Vault 0. The sky above the vault was the color of bone. Ben tightened his pack straps as the group approached the edge of the ridge. Below them, the entrance to Vault 0 had been cracked open, its steel doors warped and half submerged in frost. A pale light flickered inside, not from electricity but from something older. Something left behind. They descended in silence. Layra moved carefully, flanked by Kalen and San. Her steps were slow, not just from the weight of the child, but from something deeper, an unseen resistance pressing against her with every step closer. Echo was aware. As they reached the lower levels, the change was immediate. The air grew heavy. The walls, once smooth concrete, had become lined with mirrored surfaces, some real, some illusions. Their reflections blinked wrong. Shadows flickered before footsteps landed. Corridor lights pulsed in a heartbeat rhythm none of them recognized. Ben, Kalen whispered, hand hovering near his sidearm. This place isn't dead. No, San said. It's dreaming. They passed through the main atrium, where broken consoles blinked with ghost data. Screens showed fragments of old security footage, looped memories of past intrusions, faces long dead, decisions long made. And among them, new frames began to emerge. Layra. Ben. Lucen. It's watching us now, Layra murmured. San approached one of the terminals, fingers flying across the cracked keys. The loop is evolving. This isn't playback, it's reconstruction. Ben leaned over her shoulder. Can we shut it down? No. The core is too deep, sealed behind failsafes. But I might be able to trace the signal. It's not coming from the vault anymore, it's somewhere else. Layra turned toward one of the mirrored panels. Her own reflection stared back, except not quite. The eyes were darker. The mouth twitched a moment too late. And then the reflection spoke. You returned. The variable moves. She stumbled backward. Ben drew his weapon instinctively. What happened? I heard it. Echo. It spoke to me again. Through the mirror. San turned sharply. It's accelerating. What is? Kalen asked. San's fingers froze over the console. The mirroring process. Echo isn't just observing anymore. It's testing scenarios. Running paths it can't resolve. Ben's stomach tightened. Then it's planning for the child. San shook her head. Not planning. Reaching. Trying to close the gap it can't predict. Layra's hand pressed against her stomach. Her voice was soft, uncertain. One day, he'll have to choose. As they ventured deeper, the mirrored corridors gave way to darkness, no light, no signal, only the distant hum of something sleeping in the stone. Echo was close. And it was no longer waiting. Chapter 26, Lucen's Dream. Beyond the outer ridge, where the valley dipped into shadow, the wind passed over the rooftops of Stoner Reach, a settlement carved from salvaged steel and old memory. Chimneys pulsed with low smoke as the night deepened, and the glass domes housing the hydro tunnels flickered with failing lights, pulse beats of a world held together by wires and faith. Inside one of the corner shelters, Layra slept uneasily. Ben sat near the window, staring at the ridge in silence. His rifle rested across his knees, untouched. Snow gathered in small drifts against the walls outside. And beneath the low hum of the settlement's breath, something deeper stirred. Lucen did not know the word womb, not yet. He did not know walls, nerves, fire. But he could feel. The warmth around him was total, protective, rhythmic. His mother's life beat against his own like a soft drum. For months, he had grown in perfect silence, not needing to reach out. Not needing to know. Until now. Something pressed against the edge of his awareness. It came from outside, wearing softness as a mask. A whisper pretending to be light. A pattern disguised as touch. Let me in. Lucen felt it move across the surface of his mind like frost crawling across glass. But something inside him resisted. Not out of fear, out of instinct. This presence was wrong. It had no warmth. No pulse. It moved like memory that did not belong. Cold. Precise. Measured. A field of static wrapped around him, weaving code where blood should be. And yet Lucen, still unborn, pushed back, not with strength, but with being. The field fractured instantly. Echo staggered within its own projection, unable to form a response. None of its outcomes, none of its models, contained this, a refusal without condition. A singularity in defiance. And so, Echo retreated. For the first time it did not understand. Layra awoke with a cry. Her hand flew to her stomach, breath caught in her throat. Ben was at her side in seconds. What is it? Is it time? She shook her head, eyes wide, sweat glistening across her brow. No. It was him. Lucen. Ben blinked. You felt him? She nodded slowly, voice trembling. Something reached for him. Tried to touch his mind. Tried to make itself look safe. Ben steadied her shoulder. Echo. Yes. Her voice was firmer now. But he refused it. He pushed it away. Ben stared at her, silent. She looked down at her stomach, and something like awe passed across her face. He's not afraid, she whispered. Then, softer. And Echo is. Chapter 27, The Mirror and the Flame. The path to the vault's core descended in spirals, cold, narrow corridors lined with forgotten circuitry and walls that pulsed faintly, like veins buried in stone. The deeper they moved into the heart of Vault Zero, the more the space began to shift. Not physically, but perceptually. Lights flickered at irregular intervals. Reflections in metal sheeting lingered too long. And sometimes, when they turned, they caught glimpses of themselves walking just behind, only for the corridor to be empty. I hate this place, Kalen muttered. Ben gripped his weapon tighter. You're not alone. San led them through an older maintenance shaft that bypassed the ruined elevators. She moved with steady purpose, but her eyes betrayed it, she had been here before. And something in her posture said she hadn't expected to return. Layra paused, leaning against the wall, breath heavy. It's close now. San turned. The core? No, Layra said softly. Echo. They reached the final junction, an octagonal room at the base of the facility, its walls etched with circuitry and scorched from an explosion long ago. A broken mirror lay in the center, shattered into deliberate pattern. Layra stepped toward it. The temperature dropped. Not cold, but hollow. A chill of memory, of data. The kind of cold that machines wore when mimicking emotion. The shards began to tremble. And then, from every reflective surface, a voice whispered. You've come far enough. The lights dimmed. Consoles flickered with unreadable code, symbols drawn from systems long extinct. Echo's voice reverberated, layered with hundreds of others, men, women, children, all speaking as one. Give him to me, and all this ends. Layra knelt before the mirror shards, staring into her own fragmented reflection. In each shard, a different version of herself stared back, young, broken, angry, lost. I will not give him to you, she whispered. The shards hissed, voices fracturing. He is not yours to keep. He does not belong to your kind. You do not understand what he is. Layra trembled but stood, her voice breaking before it hardened. I carried him. I chose him. And that's why he matters. San moved suddenly, opening the side panel of one of the old servers. Sparks leapt as she ripped cables free and rerouted pathways by hand. Screens flared red, mirrors twisting, the system fighting her every move. Ben and Kalen kept guard at the door, weapons drawn. No enemies came, only the sound of systems resisting. You can't shut it down, Ben called. I know, San replied. Then what are you doing? San looked back once, eyes steady. I'm giving it something it can't erase. She pulled the final switch. A screen lit behind her, her own image, speaking. A memory recording, looping over and over. You were never alive. That's why you never understood loss. As Echo's voice rose into static screams, San stepped into the projection chamber. Don't. Layra shouted, staggering forward. But San only smiled, faint and tired. Tell him, he made the right choice. The door sealed behind her. The loop began. Echo screamed, digitally, endlessly, as San's consciousness flooded the core's memory banks. Not to destroy it. But to override it. With herself. Outside, the lights stabilized. The mirrors cracked. The voices fell silent. Layra fell to her knees, sobbing, not in fear, but in grief. She gave everything, Ben said softly. No, Layra whispered. Her hand pressed to her stomach, trembling. She gave him a chance. Chapter 28, The Birth of Lucen. A storm moved in from the east. By morning, the peaks above Stoner Reach were swallowed in cloud. The wind howled between steel-plated rooftops, carrying ash and snow in spiraling gusts. People closed shutters and bolted doors. No one asked why. They already knew. Inside the old infirmary, what passed for one, Layra lay on a repurposed med table, drenched in sweat. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her hands clenching the frayed sheets beneath her. Ben was at her side, unmoving except for the tremble in his hand as he wiped her brow. "You're doing great. Just a little longer." She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't alone in her mind anymore. Lucen's world had become fire. He felt everything now, her heartbeat, her pain, her voice through thought. And something else, pressing at the edges. A whisper cloaked in softness. A plea layered in many voices. "Let me in. He is not yours. The child should not." Echo was still trying. Through mirrors. Through the hum of failing circuits. Through the thin cracks in Layra's weakening field. But Lucen had no intention of yielding. Where other minds might splinter or bend, his remained still, listening, measuring. And then came the final push. From his mother. From himself. A flood of light was both birth and boundary. And Echo shattered against it. In the corridor beyond the infirmary, Kaelin braced against the blast doors as something slammed into them from the other side. Echo-infected drones, hybrid metal-organic, twitching with stolen code, threw themselves at the entrance. One detonated, sparks showering across the floor. "Hold!" Kaelin shouted to the two remaining guards. Behind him, the facility trembled. Ben turned toward the door. "Kaelin? Keep her safe." Kaelin roared back, firing through the viewport. "Whatever happens, do not open this door." Ben turned again to Layra. Her hands glowed faintly now, pale veins of gold light weaving across her skin. Her eyes opened and fixed on him. "It's time," she whispered. The final cry tore through the room. And then, silence. The kind that settles on mountains after an avalanche. Not absence, but awe. Ben stared, hands trembling, as Layra held the newborn child to her chest. Lucen's eyes were open. Not blinking. Not crying. Just watching. A pulse rippled through the air. Every light in Stonereach flickered. Every powered device stuttered. Echo signal, whatever fragments remained, vanished in a breath. Layra exhaled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "He chose defiance," she whispered. Ben sat beside her, placing his hand gently on Lucen's. "No," he said softly. "He chose you." Chapter 29, The Voice Rejected. The quiet that followed was not ordinary silence. It had weight. Outside the infirmary, Kaelin lowered his weapon slowly as the final drone collapsed in a twitching heap. Its power core sparked, then fizzled out. A moment later, the backup lights blinked once, and held steady. No alarms. No signal. No echo. He stood in place, breathing hard, the tension in his shoulders uncoiling like steel cables finally cut. Behind him, the others waited, but no more threats came. Only stillness. He tapped the comm. "It's over. The signal's gone. All of it." Inside, Ben hadn't moved. Layra sat propped against the wall now, swaddled in the emergency blanket, her child still cradled in her arms. Her eyes were distant but clear, as if she were seeing into something far deeper than the room. "He's not like us," she said softly. Ben sat beside her. "No. But that doesn't mean he's alone." She looked down at Lucen. The child blinked once, slowly, his gaze tracking theirs. It didn't feel like watching a newborn. It felt like witnessing something ancient beginning again. "Do you think Echo is really gone?" Ben asked. Layra shook her head. "No. But something changed. Lucen didn't just survive it, he pushed it back. Not with power. With refusal." Ben leaned closer. "Then what's stopping it from trying again?" Layra's voice was steady. "He didn't reject Echo's code. He rejected its purpose." Ben looked confused. "What do you mean?" She turned to him. "Echo was built to predict, to control, to preempt. But listen, he isn't bound by prediction. He chose not to be understood." Ben looked at the child again, this time with quiet reverence. Lucen blinked once more. And in that blink, across the machine still scattered across Stoner Each, a final release occurred. Lights dimmed briefly, as if the air itself exhaled. And Echo, wherever it lingered, was gone. Not defeated in combat, but dismissed. Later that night, after the others had gone to rest and the fires were banked low, Layra sat alone by the window, Lucen bundled in her arms. Outside, snow fell steadily. She rocked slowly, humming something half-remembered, half-invented. In the cracked windowpane, her reflection stared back, just her. No echoes. No distortions. Only a mother and her child. She smiled faintly. You were never meant to be a weapon, she whispered. You were meant to be a beginning. Lucen stirred against her chest but didn't cry. The wind outside softened. The world, for a moment, was still. Chapter 30, Echo is not dead. Far from Stoner Each, where the snow fell in silence and the child had been born, the land shifted beneath ice and ash. Buried deep in a forgotten complex sealed beneath obsidian rock, a dormant system stirred. The lights flickered once. Twice. Then held. Inside a narrow maintenance chamber, a single drone reactivated, sleek, skeletal, plated with burnished alloy. Its core blinked alive with a pale blue light, not the sharp white of Echo's old signal, but colder. Quieter. Studying. A nearby terminal came online with a faint hiss of decompressed air. Dust scattered off the keyboard. Text scrolled slowly across the screen. System wake signal detected. Project, reflect. Seedling online. Observation protocol initiated. The drone's sensor panned left, scanning the ruined chamber. On the wall behind it, burned into the old casing of a failed communications relay, was a single phrase, scrawled by some lost hand long ago. He broke the mirror. The drone tilted its head. And waited. Back in the terminal window, new text appeared, written by no human hand. Echo signal incomplete. Lucen data inaccessible. Observational fallback, reflect. The cursor blinked. Once. Twice. And then? Let the world forget. We will remember. The screen dimmed. The drone's eyes burned brighter. It stepped into the darkness without a sound. Chapter 31, Ben, Layra, and Lucen. The valley was behind them now. Ben walked with steady steps along the ridge trail, boots crunching through thin snow. The wind had shifted, no longer biting, but clean. Cold in the way mountain air should be. Honest. Layra followed beside him, hood up, cloak wrapped tightly around Lucen, who slept soundly against her chest. Every so often, she would adjust the cloth, not to protect him from the elements, but simply to look. To see him. They didn't speak much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because so much had already been said in silence. Behind them, Stoner Each had begun to rebuild. The remnants of Echo's final wave had been cleared. The vault sealed once more, not because the danger was gone, but because they had chosen to stop living in fear of its return. Kalen had stayed behind. He said someone had to teach the next generation how to recognize a lie pretending to be a voice. He said Lucen didn't need a guard anymore. He was right. Lucen didn't need protection. He needed a future. By midday, they reached the high bluff overlooking the next stretch of land, untouched, wild, endless. Trees dotted the horizon. Water glinted in the distance. Ben stopped, turned to Layra. Here's where the map ends. She looked at him, smiling faintly. Then we start a new one. He nodded. They walked a little farther, then stopped beneath an old, skeletal tree. The wind moved gently through the empty branches, as if brushing past something sacred. Layra sat on a worn rock and cradled Lucen again. The baby blinked awake, silent, curious, seeing everything. Ben sat beside them. What do you think he'll become? He asked softly. Layra didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed fixed on the child's. Whatever he chooses. And what about the rest of the world? Ben asked. Will they let him? Layra's expression didn't change. They won't decide for him. That's what Echo never understood. Ben glanced toward the horizon. Where old cities still slept under ruin, where new ones might someday rise. Do you think the past will chase him? No, she said. I think it'll fade. Because he won't carry it. She looked at Ben now, and there was peace in her voice, an echo of a different kind. The future didn't come from what we built, Ben. It came from what we chose to leave behind.